In this video, we're going to do the first of a set of patterns. This pattern is going to be structured using hexagonal grid, and we'll be working with circles in this case. So I've already brought in a few of the necessary parts for this. The hex grid came from the vector tab under the grid panel here. The circle came from the curve tab under the primitives. And I've created a few sliders for these. Right now they're set to a maximum of 10, and they are also integer numbers. Okay, so, just so you can see what's happening here, the size is affected by this one. The number of columns is affected by this slider, the number of rows by this one. For our circle, the variable is going to be the size of the radius. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to set it up so there's a kind of randomized sizing of these circles. Right now, they all have a radius of 4, and we're going to introduce some tools that allow us to randomly change the size of the circles in the various columns and rows. We'll start by bringing in a scale tool. So you're going to find that under Transform. This one here, F-line. And I'm just going to place this one over here for now. I'll move it later. And I'm going to connect it in to the circle geometry. Okay, so what you can see when I click on the circles, the circle parameter here, they're all the original circles are going to appear. When I click on this one, the scaled circles will appear. Now there's a default here, I think it's half. So it's made the circles half the radius, but it is also working off of this origin point here. So it's scaling the whole collection in the set by half. The first change we're going to make is this business about the way that it's scaling all the circles. Instead of having them all relative to this point, we are going to set it so the scaling happens relative to the center of each of these hexagons. So what I need to do is, where it says center of scaling, I need to connect there to the points. Okay, so again, the original circles are here. The scaled circles are the smaller ones that are half the size of the original radius. So the next group of inputs to add, it's the settings that allow us to randomize these. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, okay, so what I have here is the tool that allows me to randomize. So you're going to find this one under Sets and Sequence, Random. You can also type it in and search directly for random. And in order to do this, I have something here called a domain. It's construct domain. And you can type that in, double click and type that in and search for it. You'll also find this one on the Maths tab under the domain panel. It's the first one there. And I've created, I've copied some sliders. So I had 4 as the value of this one, and I copied them down here. So now what I'm going to do is connect this. So basically the domain is the start and end point for these. So if I was to switch these, well, we need to get them connected so you can kind of visualize this. This one here is the number of sets. So or number of random values. So we'll see how that impacts things shortly. But first thing I need to do is connect it from the random branch there to what's called the factor, the scaling factor. So basically what's happening is before there was a default where the circles were all made 1/2 the size of the original one. But if you want to control that, you need to give some sort of factor that establishes this. Now, if we had set this to, let's do a little test here. Let's say I disconnect this and it goes back to the default, which is 1/2 the size. Okay. What I can do is double click and put in panel here. And let's say I put 1.25. I can make it a fixed value, and so it will adjust the scale for all of them to be 1 1/4 the size of the original circle. Okay, but what I'm looking to do with this pattern is to create a random pattern. So I'm going to click on this one and delete it. So I'll go ahead and connect them, and what you can see is that it's established a start and a finish with the domain. And if I begin to slide these, you'll see that some of the circles, because this is randomized, are going to be smaller and some bigger. Okay, so it's a little bit hard to see what's happening in the chaos, but there should be circles in there anywhere from 1 unit to 6 units in terms of their scale relative to that original circle. Okay, so, and this slider right here, you can see is affecting, it's basically establishing how many in the set are going to be affected by this. And we'll come back to this value a little bit later. But my goal is to make these circles so they don't overlap and touch each other. So one thing that I'm going to need to do is alter the domain start and possibly the domain finish. Let's see here. I want to be able to go to smaller numbers. So I'm going to change the max, let's say, to 2. And I'm going to double click here again, and I'm going to turn it into a floating point number instead of an integer. And this will allow me to have a number of decimal points. I don't know, maybe 2 decimal points is okay. All right, so now my slider is going from 0 to 2, but with decimals, with two places for the decimals. And for the maximum, it's still going up to 10. That's too big. So I'm going to also change this one to 2 and change it to a number that can have decimals. Okay, now I don't know if I can, maybe it doesn't matter. But basically, I'm going to put the domain start at a number under 1, and for the domain end, I want to just make sure I'm not getting bigger than the hexagons here, because I don't want these circles to touch. Now, it might be helpful to turn off the original circles so we can sort of see what the pattern would look like. So I'm going to click on the circle geometry here, and then move my cursor up here a little bit, right click, and turn that preview off. So now we're just seeing the new circles that were made with randomized scaling. Okay, now let's move this one out of the way. Okay, now I made a change that I'm going to put back how it was before, so we're not jumping ahead. Okay, this is where we left off. I've moved this so it's not on top of other things. And now what I want to do is, you'll notice that these 5 circles are all one size, and then everything else is a smaller size. So what I want to do is I want to use the grid to control the number of kind of circle variations. So one of the steps is to basically connect the points here with the number of random values. Okay, you can ignore this for the time being. And then this slider is going to control the seed. So as we discussed before, that is basically one randomized pattern. So we'll leave that as it is for now. And we need to bring in one more entity here. So I'm going to spread these out a little bit. Okay, and it's going to resolve this issue of the multiple sets that are happening in there. I'm going to go to the panel here and look for something called list length. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to take the number of the points generated under the hexagonal grid, and what we'll do is we'll apply that to the number. So it's going to go down here like this. Okay. So we're basically using the same number here in this way to generate the number of random values. So we want them to match. That's what's that's doing. It's just saying whatever the length of this list, that's the number that we want to include here. Okay, now we can start to, and at this point, maybe it would be best to turn off that hexagonal grid, preview off, so you can start to see how this is affecting how the circles are going to be basically be transforming. So it looks like my domain end is too big. Again, the goal was to kind of not allow them to overlap like that. So I'm going to bring this down. You know, I can also manipulate what the smallest might possibly be. And again, the seed is just kind of setting the start point for the variable. So if you kind of scroll through here, this one has, you know, because I started with a number slider of 10 integers, 10 possible seeds, but you could always, you know, increase that if you want more variables. Right, so that's basically the process for creating a randomized, a grid of circles with randomized sizes. And you can continue to kind of play with the settings a little bit, increase the number of rows, change the size of the grid, increase the number of, oh, that was, sorry, this is columns. This one is establishing the number of rows. You could, you know, play around with the minimum and maximum sizes for the circles. In terms of their start point, you could vary the seed, that's the origin number. You could double click here and increase the number here. Like if I went to, let's say 50, I can kind of see what will happen with these seed variables. Okay, so when you're kind of pleased with the settings that you've generated, you want to make a screenshot that shows both the pattern, the full pattern, and the Grasshopper script.